Record. Hey everybody, welcome to the Fulham Career Cast, and today we have Christina Quinn joining us today. So without further ado, let's get right to the conversation. Christina, how's it going?
Sure, I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. It's another day, Thursday here, doing well in Cleveland. And how are you doing? In Newport, right?
Yep. Yeah, sunny day down here in Rhode Island. So far so good. Work from home day, I don't know, 200 something, but wow, morale is up. So that's all good.
Love to hear it. Yeah, it's such an interesting time, just in how, I'm working from Cleveland, you're remote, so we're just slugging away. So without further ado, let's kind of get a little bit deeper into your background. Could you tell us your BC grad year, concentration, and a little bit about your early career journey?
Sure.
About?
Yeah, so I was in CSOM, BC, but I would say I was probably one of those people that, though I loved studying business and I knew I wanted to do business undergrad, I was very much I don't want to work at a bank, I don't want to work in finance kind of CSOM student, much to kind of my own chagrin. And I think where I thought I wanted to go from a career standpoint was more working off of my extracurriculars. So I was on the Heights at BC all 4 years. And those that are familiar with it, it's an independent student newspaper. So it's kind of unique in that it has a business side and it runs itself. So that was really neat because that was sort of my first foray into the stuff that I thought I was interested in. I was our online manager, and that was what inspired me to, in addition to the marketing concentration I had, add in information systems. And those two things working together kind of inspired the path I ended up taking. So junior year, following that same path of I'm interested in publishing, I'm interested in kind of the intersection of media and the publishing world, I thought I'm going to work in magazines, right? So I lived in New York City during the summer. I interned at Condé Nast, which for those that have seen The Devil Wears Prada, that's the publishing house that produces Vogue, GQ. Devil Wears Prada is based on that movie, and it was true to life, right? Very beautiful office in New York. I definitely felt like the girl in that movie at some point. Everyone's wearing stilettos and beautifully dressed. But entering senior year, that path, which is different than some very typical paths, you don't get an offer at the end of the summer. You have to go into senior year and get ready to apply for a job in the spring. And during that year, about 15 people from the department I had been in at Condé got fired. So you read the tea leaves on that, and now this is March of my senior year, you start thinking, I don't really know if that's what I want to do. I'm not sure. So graduation comes, and I had started talking to a bunch of different startups, and that was always interesting to me. Again, the IS piece of it, like new businesses and kind of where technology could go. All of that was super inspiring. And so I had read Blake Mycoskie, if you're familiar with Tom's Shoes, that founder, he had written a book. And in it, he says, I hired my beginning team, my first team off of Craigslist. So naturally, that's what I did. I took to Craigslist. I was at home in Rhode Island like I am now. And I thought, let me see what's out there. I ended up applying to one job. I got the job, and there was a BC alum at the company actually who was head of operations. She pulled me into an interview with the CEO. And what was my summer internship after graduation ended up being a job for 3 years. And that is really how I ended up in finance. So it was almost a complete accident, really.
That's awesome. Finding Craigslist is so unique, and it just, you can find it in many different ways. We always preach network, LinkedIn, different circles you have, and then other sources like Craigslist as well. And
yeah, you open, right? Like I don't know if you could even do that today, but it probably wouldn't be viable in the same way. But sorry, I'm interrupting you. But yeah, I think you never know, right?
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit more about that first role you had. I think you mentioned the name of the organization. Sorry, I might have forgotten, but kind of what you were doing, day-to-day skills or day-to-day duties, skills used, etc.
Sure. Yeah. So the name of the firm is Havener Capital Partners, and based in Newport. It was a really small company, 8 people. Most were remote, actually. So my boss, her husband, and I were really the only ones in the Newport office. And what was cool about that was it gave me that startup experience that I had been wanting, because the firm had been founded in the last 5 years. So I think on my first day on the job was helping to assemble portions of my desk from like whatever furniture company they had ordered from. But in terms of like the hard skills and what was I actually doing, I got hired as a marketing and operations intern. And so the way our business worked was we were a boutique and we had a bunch of different mutual fund managers who were our clients. And my boss at the time really loved these breakaway stories. So think of a person managing money who decides to spin out, start their own fund, and really pave their own path by building on their existing track record, which is cool because, again, if you think of startups, those are almost like startup financial firms to some degree. And what they needed, though, was you have a smaller shop that's just broken out. They don't necessarily have a huge bench of marketing people who can build decks or can handle webcasts for them, who can, help raise assets. And so our firm did that, and we would partner with these managers, and depending on what they needed, it could be as extensive as redoing their website, redoing their investor deck, and all of the kind of marketing piece of it, also including the sales side. So calling on institutional or private investors. If anyone's familiar with like registered investment advisors, the private wealth channel, that was kind of our market in terms of clients. And we would just try to have conversations to raise capital for these new funds. You never know, I think, how your PowerPoint abilities are going to translate into the real world, but I can tell you that a lot at the beginning of what made me good at my job was I could look at something and rebuild it in PowerPoint and customize it to the branding of our managers. So it was neat because it's a combination of almost creative work, but also strategic work. And I think the second thing that I appreciated about that was female founded financial firm. That's super important. And for me, I think as someone who wasn't sure she wanted to be in finance and wasn't sure that that world was for her, being able to have a really cool boss, a really open and invitational kind of head of research who was her husband, who would answer any questions I had about finance, that brought me in a way that I don't think I would have found if I had gone through the traditional recruiting path.
That's awesome. So you found the way into to an industry that you didn't think you'd be interested in, but you found kind of your niche in the marketing in the marketing field side of it, and you continue to work. Were there any kind of qualifications that you had coming out of BC or anything you needed to be hired right away, or was it?
It was honestly the PowerPoint skill set, I think. It was the fact that I showed that I could do marketing related work. I think the fact that I had concentrated in marketing helped, and that I had been in the business school, I think certainly helped. But, I knew basically nothing I didn't concentrate in finance. I hadn't really taken a lot of financial electives. I had taken basic finance, so I understood what is a stock, what is a bond, and kind of that concept. But it was very invitational, and really I was able to deepen my knowledge because I had a firm that wanted was valuable was the information systems side of my background ended up being very helpful too, because
Yep.
it's sort of on one hand it's marketing, on the other hand it's this ops research side. I had used Salesforce a lot in my position as advertising manager in the newspaper. We would use it to manage our ad sales and invoices. And so having that background, but also having studied databases and studied IS, and having that logical skill set, that was super helpful because I could dive headfirst into helping out on that side of things too. So think reporting or inputting data, being able to organize things. I think that ended up being super helpful. I don't think I would have not gotten the job if I hadn't had it, but I think being able to talk about that certainly helped.
Using transferable skills all across the board. I love it.
Really.
So could you kind of talk more about your progression and what you did afterwards, and how you moved up the chain?
Yeah, definitely. So I think the other benefit of being in a small company is it's unique in many cases as someone right out of college to have access to the head of your company and the founder of your company. I got very lucky in that the person I was working for, I think, recognized something in me that when I started in marketing, her background was sales, and she really nurtured me towards that path, not pushed me, but sort of offered the ability to learn about what that could look like for me. And so probably about a year into me starting off in a marketing and ops role, she started opening up the door to maybe someday you want to be on the fundraising side. What would it look like if you thought about this? And so I ended up progressing into a fundraising role. And I think with that, it helped that I was able to learn a lot from the people that I worked with. It gave me the ability to have smart conversations with both our fund managers who I was working with on the marketing side, but also with potential clients at some point, and gain comfort. So I moved from marketing we hired a graphic designer who took on a lot of my responsibilities there. I ended up implementing a project management system actually to help track the work that was living in my head that needed to be kind of taught to a new person. But then from there, I was sales full time. And so I was helping to create new relationships and develop warm leads that I would then pass off to the account manager that I supported. And together we covered west of the Mississippi. I actually worked full time from home at that point, which is really interesting. So I moved back up to Boston and was working like this for 2 years, which was unique, I think, also at age 24 to be at my desk every day. But I was traveling a lot. So we'd travel every other week. And that's kind of where I moved. I think within 6 months, it was getting to the point where I was going from being an internal salesperson, developing those leads, to being able to manage my territory. But all the while this was happening, I also sort of had this internal conflict. You get licensed to be a registered representative to sell mutual funds. And so there's a lot that goes into that. You have to study, you have to pass a test. But I think in doing that test, I had this kind of moment of truth with myself where I realized I might not have been as passionate about under the radar mutual fund managers as my boss was. And that forced me to have a conversation with myself to say, all right, I know I like finance now. I know this is a market I care about being in. I care about the fact that there aren't enough women in it. And, that I want to stay in it. But the other half of it is, well, okay, what do I want to be doing then in it? And where I've really landed is I have always loved businesses. I've always loved entrepreneurship. And that's really interesting to me. Where do those all come together? It's venture capital. But hindsight being 2020, it's very difficult to break into that if you haven't taken a certain traditional path. And so you then arrive at a point where you're like, all right, what is the next step I do need to take if I want to go down that path, right? Where do I need to start directing myself and directing my career to better orient myself to get that job that I maybe want someday? And I think the most obvious piece of it was I need to move from public fund investing into a space that's on the private side. So again, stroke of luck, but keep an eye on your LinkedIn inboxes. I always encourage people to do that. Don't just ignore people's invitations. I had a headhunter reach out to me about an opportunity, and he didn't tell me exactly who it was, but it was clear that it was a PE firm. So I thought, you know what, let me have this conversation. Let me see if this goes down any path. And that is actually how I ended up interviewing at HarbourVest, where I currently work now.
It all comes full circle. That's amazing. And could you kind of talk a little bit about your current role with HarbourVest and kind of what you're specializing in and what you see the projection is?
Yeah. So it's interesting. HarbourVest is very different from my first job in that it is a 40-year-old company. There are 600 people at our company, and we have 10 offices globally, so very different scale. And up until, lately, I was working in an office full time right in downtown, right across from South Station. And that, to me, I loved that change. I'm a very So my first role at HarbourVest was pretty similar to what my first role had been at Havener. I was helping to work on product development marketing. And what that really means in terms of jargon was any of the new funds that we were producing, it requires a deck, it requires legal documents, it requires internal selling tools for the sales team so they understand how to talk about the product. Any new fund that was launching during that period of time, I was helping to work on those things. So again, PowerPoint coming in big. But that was great too, because as someone who's so thirsty to learn about this segment of the market and this portion of finance that I had an interest in, you get to work with managing directors, right? Because people who are leading funds and the ones that are saying this is a portion of your job is to work on the new product that's coming out, they're usually very senior people. So it was an amazing opportunity to get really close relationships and do great work for people who had really strong and amazing careers in an area that I was interested in. So I did that for 3 years. My current role was an interesting opportunity because we had taken on some internal research to say, you know, in partnership with an outside consultant to say, how do we grow? So our firm has grown quite rapidly in the last couple of years. We're at a bit of an inflection point, and one of the things within that growth, one of the things you look at is say, we want to raise more capital. How do we do that without tripling or quadrupling our team, right? What are ways that we can scale? So that's actually a pretty entrepreneurial problem in what seems like an older organization, quote unquote. And I got very lucky because they did decide to establish my current team as a result of that work. And what we really are is, you'd hear it as sales operations in sort of everyday life. We call it commercial operations at HarbourVest, but essentially I'm a team. I was the first hire to the team, and my current boss was the second last summer. So the team has only existed for a year, but what we're meant to do is we're meant to partner with the team that's doing fundraising for HarbourVest, and through a combination of like technology solutions and business process improvements, make their lives easier. The idea being that if they have to spend less time on things like inputting their notes into Salesforce correctly, or they have to spend less time on trying to report on something, if we can build reports or we can build better systems for them to do that work, or surface really robust analytics that tell us something that would be really hard to figure out otherwise, then hopefully they have more time to do their job and they should be able to be more effective at doing their job. That's a bit of an oversimplification of it, but I struggle sometimes to describe what the role is because it's not, again, it's not a typical job you think of in finance, but it's super interesting. It's a really interesting blend of both like the quant side and having to crunch numbers and do analysis, but also the people side and having to listen to what my users, in this case our investor relations team, needs, and then partner with IT to say, okay, how can we build a solution that fixes this, or here's what the problem is, how are we going to figure it out for them.
Awesome. So you get the best of both worlds there. That's always something we like to focus on for students. Good. So I guess the last really big question I have is just in this kind of current weird climate we're in the market, what advice would you have for any young students, seniors, especially looking for jobs and maybe not having the best of success right now? Any kind of input or anything they can take away from your story?
Yeah, I think, and you probably heard it in both examples of the major companies I've worked at, is I think there's this misconception that there's only one path or one way to get to somewhere or to get to a job. And that's totally not the case, right? So be open-minded. You have to believe in yourself and understand what your skills are and what you bring to the table, and almost be a little audacious in that. Like, you have something to offer a company and you have something to offer people. But then last, I think it's also being open-minded about what your job could look like and leveraging other humans and other people for advice. Like, I had a student who, he must have graduated a couple years ago now from BC, but he reached out to me and just wanted to know what my job was and wanted to know about my industry. Informational interviews are an incredible way to learn about what a role is and what someone really does day to day. And frankly, they're much easier to land. Most people are willing to get on the phone with you and talk about what their job is in a way that they might not be if you're saying, I need a job, can you help me? And that's not to say like conceal your purposes, but it's more to say that the more you understand what you actually want to do and the more you understand where you're trying to fit yourself in, the easier it is for a company to see how you would add value. I think that like that is a really valuable way to brand yourself and a really valuable way to position yourself to be somewhere you want to be. And when I had first graduated, someone gave me that advice, and it's stayed true my whole career. You know, she literally said, like, no one in HR wants to have to figure out how you will fit in. If you can tell them that and you can show them, then it will go miles and it'll differentiate you from other people. So a couple of snippets. I didn't limit it to one piece of advice.
That's perfect. Thank you. And so I guess with that, informational interviews, really appreciate the time. Is there the best way that a student can connect with you, either LinkedIn or email, or what's the best way to get in contact with you?
Yeah, I'm pretty responsive on LinkedIn. I'm on there all the time. And separately, like, I do a lot of work with BC's entrepreneurship community through the SSC. So that type of programming, if people are interested in the startup scene coming out of BC, or familiar with Duncan Walker, who's the entrepreneur resident at the Shea Center, those are all that's a network that I play in a lot. So come to Shea events and or come to SSC events. You can reach me that way too. I'm on the website and there should be some contact information on there. And always happy to have that conversation with current students or students that have graduated. They're trying to think about what their next step is, because I think, we do our jobs all day, right? So you want to be in one where you're excited.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you, Christina. I won't hold you any longer.
Nice talking to you, Drew.
All right. Have a good one.